Welcome to the Business Trendsetter Podcast, where we talk about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Charan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We are Spark Partners who are here every week to discuss all things trends, all things business growth. We look at the world through the lens of a lot of experience, a lot of years, a lot of heartache, a lot of success, all the way around. And today's topic is going to be what's on the minds of a lot of people is the results of the election. No, we're not going to talk about politics. We're not going to go in any sort of deep dive in one way or another. We're just going to talk about how the results of the election at all levels, whether it's at the top, at the presidential level, or municipal level. There's one thing that holds true across all of that, and that is, of course, what, Adam?
I lost that thread. Sorry.
That the things don't change very much, right, with respect to trends.
Yeah. Yes. I just that's a big statement. I think that the what we want to talk about here is how there's some trends, the big trends, those cannot be affected in the short term by any politician, and that's what we want to make sure we notice. Now, how those trends go forward can be affected by powerful people that lead governments or that lead companies. So there will be, even though the long-term trend will continue to move, in the short term, we could see something that looks almost counter to trend. And that's what we need to be prepared for now. Okay. So I think that's the intent of what we're trying to talk about today. And to be more specific, there's three big trends we've been talking about for several years. We said these are going to define the decade of the 2020s, and it's like probably even longer than that. And one of those is demographics. The second one was climate awareness or ecological awareness. And the third was autonomous processes. All right. And so at a high level, we have to realize there's nothing that any president or his administration will do that will affect demographics in 4 years. Now, Chairman Mao of China, he was able to affect demographics in his country many years ago by coming up with a single child program. But that didn't play out in 4 years. That took a lot longer than 4 years before it had an impact. And in fact, that impact's being felt now. And what people need to realize is that the demographics that we have today, that for too many older people, not enough younger people, most of the people that are the places where population is growing is actually in India and Brazil and Africa, that by 2050, half the people in the world will have originated from Africa. Those are things that will not change in the next 4 years, period. We're not going to have anything happen in the United States that will increase the number of young people unless it was by immigration. You can't do anything to improve the number of 25-year-old workers in 4 years.
Right.
If you do something to stimulate births, it's going to take 25 years, right? And in terms of climate, there are facts about what's happening with climate, and we can see them, and we need to prepare for those, and as businesses prepare for those. And being a denier about the fact that the climate is changing will not do you any good. And then the third one, autonomous processes, is one that's really impacted by artificial intelligence, and it's impacted by business needs to deal with demographics and cost constraints and problems with the climate. And that's not going to stop either, right? So those are going to go ahead in the long term and in the short term. Now, one of the things that studying trends, believe it or not, when I give my presentations, I refer to a guy named Galen who worked in year 200 BC. And I refer to a lot of historical things. And there was a time called the Dark Ages where we did, as a race, as a human race, we said that we're not going to pay much attention to the scientists. And then eventually we had the Renaissance, which got us back to thinking that people that were skilled and educated were important people. What we can learn from that period was that it was pretty dark, it was pretty dank, and there wasn't much advancement in civilization or work. And if we trace that to modern business today, the reality is that when businesses try to go against trend, it never works out very well. I mean, just look at Spirit Airways filed for bankruptcy, right? I mean, they're in trouble. Big Lots is gone, Sears is gone, TGI Fridays is gone, Red Lobster's gone, Boca de Beppo is gone, Hostess Bread and Wonder Twinkies, they're gone. Research in Motion, gone. And then we've focused a lot this year on Walgreens, Intel, and Boeing, and the big problems that those companies are into. All of those happened because people fought the trends. And so what I want to point out is that regardless of what the administration wants to do, whatever in the year 2016 administration, the 2020 administration, or now the 2024 administration, no matter what any of those administrations want to do, if you go with the trends, what happens is you will get economic growth and you will get enhancement and things will be good. If you fight the trends, things go poorly, right? We're probably going to see in the next couple of years some efforts to fight trends. And again, if we look back in history, what we've seen is that people become nostalgic for the way things used to be. My whole gestalt here that we're talking about trends got started not because I wanted to focus on trends, but rather I wanted to focus on why business people made a lot of mistakes. And that was when I wrote the book that came out in 2007. And most of that book isn't about trends. Most of that book is actually about how we lock in on the past. And what happens is we get used to doing something and we lock in personally, and then we lock our businesses into something that's in the past. And one of the things we can see that's happened in this last election, in fact, we're seeing it happen globally, there's this sort of rose-colored glasses view or mythology of the past, and that everything was wonderful. Even though people had diseases and,
Right.
the 50s weren't as nice as everybody wants to think they were, or the 60s, or the 70s. They weren't as, wonderful as people might want to say they were. And but now what happens is there's like this notion of, we don't want to, there was a fight against proceeding. We're reading a lot in the papers today that a lot of the people who voted here and a lot of what's happening in some other countries like Brazil and the Philippines and in India are leaders that are saying that they're kind of holding back on growth. I mean, they're holding back on moving forward, that the population doesn't see the benefit of moving forward with the new technologies, with certain kinds of leaders, more of a liberal democracy sort of an approach. And so they're holding back on that. So what they're trying to do is lock in on what happened in the past. And again, what we documented in the book, and we've documented, you and I have documented now for the last 5 years, what we've been doing with all the case studies now for 25 years is showing that when you lock in on the past, the world changes and you become out of date. So that's simple.
Yeah.
Always happens. So trying to lock in on the past isn't going to work. So if you try to lock in and say, oh, look, the world was wonderful when we didn't worry about climate change and petroleum, reduced petroleum and bad things happening in the environment, you can lock in on it, but it's not going to stop it. It's not going to stop the world from getting, hotter, right? It's not going to stop it. You can say, I don't want to have immigrants around. Okay, you can say that. That's not going to stop the demographic problem of an insufficient number of workers, right? So the trend will continue to play itself out, even if you try to become a denier. And what we want to do is recognize this as business people and start to say, okay, in the short term, I have to be prepared for what's likely to happen. But in the long term, realize that the trend is still going to play itself out, which means it'll be a more difficult period the next 2 years for business people in the United States and for those that operate globally. There are going to be more interactions that are going to be harder to work your way through. Like, for example, tariffs. We're hearing that we're going to see an increase in tariffs. What does that mean? Well, it means that globalization will not be as effective. It won't work as right. And what it also means is that your cost of goods are going to go up. So you have to start preparing today saying, look, it appears as if a lot of people are going to, there are many countries that are going to get involved in this tariff war. And as such, you need to prepare now for the fact that your supply chains are going to become problematic, right? Especially supply chains that are connected to Russia or connected to China. Those supply chains are going to have a great difficulty in the short term. Now, what are you going to do about it? I think you better start planning for that today. That is what I think we need to take away from this election. So
I think a lot of people tend to have a very polarized view of what's going to happen in January and beyond. Whether you're on the left or the right, you have a strong opinion whether or not Trump taking the reins is going to be helpful or hinder. And what we're saying here is that just read the damn tea leaves. You know what's there now. With respect to these trends, they're not going to stop. They're just going to be diverted, or maybe some will be accelerated. You never know. Maybe some will be actually accelerated, while others will decelerate. But in the end, if you're a smart business owner, you prepare for what we think right now is the playbook. And if things change, then you'll have already plan that as well in case it goes in the opposite direction.
So let's take, for example, the discussion around, I started off with tariffs. If tariffs, even small tariffs, go into place and we start to reduce globalization, costs will go up, and it'll mean there'll be shortages. And so you'll have both the tariff cost that'll be added onto your product, so you're going to have to pass that on to your customers or eat it and have no profits, right? So you're going to have higher costs of operation. Step two is you're going to have reduced access to product, because as tariffs make it more difficult, there'll be fewer buyers, and the offshore manufacturers that are selling into the United States and probably into Europe, because they'll probably follow suit, will end up causing us to have a shortage of products. So that means you need to really start paying attention now to where you think you have supply chain issues today, because they're likely to get far worse. And you might have to reconfigure your product offerings, saying, look, I can't get you what you want. This is what I can get you, right? To prepare for this. So the government intervention that we can expect, because it's been anticipated and been stated will happen, means that we have to prepare for those two eventualities. The second one is mass deportations. We're hearing there's going to be a lot of rounding up of people and sending them outside of the country. What does that mean? Well, again, back to the demographic problem. You're not going to, if you deport a lot of people, they're most likely not going to be in their 50s and 60s. And if they're younger than 20, they're not in the workforce. So what we care about are those that are being deported between the ages of 20 and 45. I don't know how big that number is, but we're being told by the incoming administration it's a large number. If that occurs, there are going to be significant severe labor shortages, very significant labor shortages. That will play into the autonomous process world. And that means that you better start preparing today for, how can I run my business with fewer people? You know, am I going to have to automate my incoming orders because I just can't have someone sitting in an office taking orders, doing paperwork? How am I going to automate that? You better start looking at it really quickly if you're a small business today. Like, how do I deploy the people I have in the most high value positions so that I can get things done?
When I was in Vistage just recently, the last time I was at a meeting, which I don't know when that was, probably a year ago, the number one issue across the board among 14 or 15 companies was not inflation, was not rising costs or supply chain issues. The number one issue across the board was labor. Finding the right people, whether it was somebody at the lowest level doing manual labor, or if it was some high-level executive, across the board. And that will be exacerbated if, in fact, the deportation does take place. And like you just said, is there a way you can prepare for that by sort of preemptively offloading that onto AI processes or other things?
Right. And again, you know, to help your own business today, I think that if you're using a large number of immigrants, you can't know if they're legal or illegal. That would be very difficult for you to prove on all of them. It would be important that you start saying, okay, maybe I should talk to the people in my local government, my state representatives, my people within the state, and then my Congress people and senators, about when people are, if they're going to be, let's call rounded up, that's the phrase I hear, how do we get them legal? How can we, instead of sending them out of the country, how could we go about a rapid process of making them legal immigrants? Because we need them in the workforce. We need them in everything from agriculture to manufacturing to retail trades to fast food centers. There's a lot of places that need hands, and in the short term, while we try to automate processes. And perhaps you should, I would not say perhaps, it's important if you have this kind of a labor force that you start immediately trying to work on the issue, not necessarily of stopping the deportations, because that is probably not going to be a successful approach. But you could say, I need the labor, and what am I supposed to do about it? And there you might be able to say, well, maybe we could try to create a way, as we are heading people towards the border, making them into somebody who can stay and work in a job. We could change the process around keeping people and then looking at how many new immigrants we bring in, because the demographic problem is not going to go away. We're going to need the people we have, and we're going to need more. I don't know how we're going to get those more, given what I'm hearing is likely to happen in the next 2 years, but that will create more and more shortages. And if we get to the point that we don't have licensed practical nurses, we don't have, you can't put a senior citizen in a nursing home because there's nobody that can tend to them because, you know, just not enough people. Fast food restaurants continue to close, and other establishments like that, because they can't put people in the front lines cooking and cleaning and dealing with customers. then you're going to see a reaction to it. But that won't happen for a while, but let's prepare for it today.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an entrepreneur and you're in the business of maybe staffing, you might want to consider changing your direction towards lower end people, or even creating some sort of framework so you're hiring people from the Philippines. I mean, these companies already exist and the Upworks and all that already, but that might need to take a level up, a bigger scale.
Yeah. So
Go
so
ahead.
robotics, for example, I've been reading recently there was an article, a company had figured out they'd been working for several years on a robot that could clean a sink. It seems like a kind of a silly thing, but it turns out, cleaning a sink takes some talent, understanding how to apply the sponges, how to apply the soap, how to know that you've got it clean when you walk away. All right. That's important if you have a hotel, because they're trying to come up with a robot that could clean a hotel room, right? You're trying to come up with a robot that could clean a kitchen in a restaurant. So we are at the precipice of some of these robotics being available. Now is the time to explore that. Now is the time to get out there and see if you can. You and I have talked about 3D printing in construction, and we've talked about 3D housing and 3D buildings. One of the biggest limitations on that has been the materials. So when you try to take and mix up the concrete goo and you're going to put it into the 3D printing machine, it has to be the right kind of goo that is actually able to make a dwelling, a building that is able to stand up, it's able to be strong, and not too expensive. Well, there's been people working on that, and there are now some new technologies coming out of Europe where they actually have much better materials. So if you're in the construction trades and you're saying, wow, I'm going to have trouble getting bricklayers, I want masons and carpenters, now's the time to be exploring that. And you be a pioneer, because if there's not enough masons, there's not enough these people, and you're one of the first out there with one of these 3D printing solutions, and you can keep making houses for people in a country like America today, where we're housing short. We know that it'll take a decade to catch up on the housing, even with mass deportations. Now's the time to really come out ahead by looking at these sorts of very advanced technologies that we've been talking about, but which now are at the point of being usable, and you're going to desperately need them based upon what we hear the policy likely to be.
Or even if you have a company that creates things, manufacturing company, this might be the time to actually set up shop in Mexico or set up shop in somewhere else. And I don't think there'll be tariffs on Mexican goods, but if there is, at least there'll be parity, because your labor costs will be lower. And also you'll be one of the first to do that. I mean, obviously there's companies doing this now, but you'll be one of the first of the new batch. And so all these are scenarios that you need to plan for. And that's one of the things that Adam and I sort of talk a lot about, Adam, scenario planning. We've discussed it. We've had, a dozen podcasts about it. We do it day in, day out. And a lot of people don't understand that it has to be done if you want to be ready and nimble for whatever comes next.
That's right. And so we can take this, when working with a company, we get down to a much more specific level. So let's just take, for example, what's going to happen if, let's say, the policies that are likely to occur. And we can touch the policies to some of the people that are being recommended for cabinet posts. So, for example, Matt Gaetz is being recommended as to be the Attorney General. Will he be? I don't know. But what we do know is that the policies that we're talking about here will probably go forward, even if a less mercurial person than Gaetz ends up in the job. So what we talked about, he's talking about here, deep reductions or elimination of certain certain law enforcement. We talked about getting rid of the ATF, getting rid of the FBI, Border Patrol guards, deep reductions or elimination of those things. Now, is that likely? Probably that will be an issue there. Probably going to be an issue there. So what does that mean for businesses? Well, it means, first of all, interstate crime will go up, because the FBI is responsible for interstate crime. So if somebody is a cyber criminal doing business in New Mexico, then they're going after customers in California. You won't be able to appeal to the FBI to break it down. So that means that small business people, you better start being aware right now of potential cyber crime on your business. This is not something that's been as big a deal for small to mid-sized companies, because why not? Well, the bad guys went after the big companies. Big companies are bringing in their own people. They go to law enforcement like the FBI. But if we downsize the FBI and we downsize ATF, then that means that there's going to be fewer people out there stopping the interstate drug lords, the drug traffickers. It's going to be fewer people going after the businesses, and fewer people going after fraud and other types of white collar crime. So as a small to mid-sized business, this is something we don't want to spend money on. It's not lucrative. It doesn't make more revenues. It doesn't help you to grow. But I would say now you're going to have to start thinking somewhat defensively. You can't just have an open internet site with people putting orders and credit cards on it. I mean, if you've been going down that road, it is the time to now invest in making that secure. Because otherwise you could end up with losing all your customers. All you need is one attack and they grab your database with your customers' credit cards on it, and you could lose all of them. They may decide just not to do business with you anymore, right? So it's really important that you understand that if we downsize the law enforcement groups, as we're hearing will happen in justice because of new attorney general, whoever that might be prepared. So start thinking about that today. Where are the loopholes? Where are the risks that I have inside of my technologies as I'm using them today?
Yeah, and there's tons of resources online for how people actually their policies. If you go to votesmart.org as an example, you can put up Matt Gaetz's issues, both official and unofficial. And right here, all of them are laid out of what he thinks about immigration. What do you think about abortion? I mean, whatever else, right? What do you think about defense, crime, all that in here? Of course, all the other cabinet picks are on there as well, at least those that have public office. Those that don't, there's other websites that'll give you some, shed some light. So there's lots of scenario plans you can do right now. And we're just talking about the federal level. I don't know how it is in California for you, but some of the state elections were very pivotal and very sort of can set the direction of the state for the next 20 years if we're not careful.
Yeah. Well, again, now let's take a turn and look at the Defense Department, okay? For the last decade, practically, the Defense Department has struggled to hit its hiring goals, its recruiting goals. Fewer people have opted to join the military as a way to start their careers. And remarkably, one of the biggest pools of applicants have been early immigrants. People came to the country that don't necessarily have a lot of money. Their parents don't have a lot of money. They need to get their feet under them. They need to get a solid footing, get a skill set, and they've joined the military. And so if we go into mass deportations, if we reduce the number of immigrants, then that means there's going to be fewer of them. So we know that hiring is going to be a problem for the military. The second thing is we are hearing if Pete Hegseth does take over, what the goal here is they want to get rid of a lot of the generals and admirals and leaders out there that the new administration says are part of not being effective. So they're saying that you want to get rid of diversity. That means fewer women, literally saying fewer women, fewer people of color. He thinks that's overblown in the military. That's going to hurt recruiting. But it also means that people that like women and people of color, people that are higher ranks in the military are going to say, screw it, I'm out of here. I mean, if I can't get promoted, if I can't move up the chain, then I'm not going to be here. So that means that we're looking at probably a deficit in terms of employees in the military that could start as early as next year. If they start saying at the top level of the Department of Defense, we're going to get rid of some generals and colonels because we don't like them, those people have loyal folks that work for them. As those people walk out the door, we're going to see the people under them walk out the door. Now what happens is you have a less prepared military. With a less prepared military, you're not able to do things like, say, stop China if they decide to take a coup and go after Taiwan, right? We just won't have the military there, the people to do it. And simultaneously, this administration has been saying we don't look to do it. They're saying they want, more of a focus on the nation, more nationalism. And with that, they're saying that they're less interested in protecting Ukraine from Russia than protecting NATO from Eastern Europe, in protecting Taiwan from China. So what we can start to say right now is it's not a matter of budget. It's a matter of, do you have the people and the resources in order to protect yourself in these other parts of the world? And the odds are likely no, especially when what we're hearing is that the number one use of the military in 2025 and 2026 is going to be rounding up immigrants and sending them out of the country. So if that's where the military is deployed, rounding up people from Arkansas to Wyoming and sending them out of the country, they're not going to be available to go to Russia. They're not going to be available to go to Poland. They're not going to be available to go to Czechoslovakia or to go to the Philippines or to Vietnam or any other location to try to protect our supply chains. Again, that's what we have to be aware of. So again, that incentive to start saying you better be looking for supply chains that are short. Mexico, Canada, United States. Again, just as Manny said, I think you got to be very aware that the trend, that not the trend, that the impact, short-term impact of this is likely to be one that is not good for your supply chain.
Right. And then beyond that, also consider your customers and what the struggles they're having. I mean, there's one thing to be said about supply chain and your own resources, but what are your customers going to be facing, and can you get in front of that? We talk a lot about deeply understanding your customers. If your customers are sitting on a vein of activity that will be disrupted by the new administration, and you can solve their problem, well, that's a massive opportunity for increasing your own revenues. I mean, I'm just looking at considering the, for instance, a company that makes robots, right? If you have a marketing company, can you go to that company and say, listen, we understand that you have this robot to flip burgers, for instance. Can we work together? Can we work on the come to deploy your technology? We'll take a commission, we'll take a cut. I mean, there's tons of opportunity if you just look at what could be happening in the future.
Yeah. Next one I want to turn to is Robert Kennedy Jr., who is slated to head up the health care of our country, right? He's anti-vaccination, he's anti-immunization. He's got a very different view of how we should invest in healthcare than has been held by previous administrations. One of the things we know is that deaths among children consistently went down over the last 50 years. In 1970, there were 67 child deaths per 100,000. In 1980, it reduced to 50 per 100,000. By 1990, it was 44. By 2000, it was 32. And by 2010, it was all the way down to 22. So we had decreased it by 67%. We cut the number of child deaths per 100,000 people in the country. But between 2020 and 2022, that number went back up to 30. So the number of child deaths is actually going up. And this is in part due to an increase in the number one cause of child deaths for most of that earlier period, from 1970 to 2015, was traffic accidents. There were passengers in cars. That's now number two. The number one cause is firearms, is the death of children. And drugs has risen dramatically. It's more than trifolded in terms of its impact. So guns and drugs are what are killing our children. Well, again, we're going to reduce law enforcement expenses. We're probably not going to be fighting the war on drugs the way we used to. But at the same time, what we have to start realizing is that we're going to be putting our child population at risk if we don't give them immunizations, if we don't give them vaccines. So what does that mean for us as business people? Well, it means that people might work from home is going to become more popular if you don't have flu shots, if you don't have COVID shots, if we're not making people take measles shots and all the things that we've done for the last 60 years, then it means disease will become more common. And if disease is becoming more common, the way you stop that is less transmission. Less transmission comes from what? Staying away from other people. That doesn't mean it's a lockdown, but it means that we need to rethink whether or not we want to be able to be pulling people back in. If you want to have a healthy workforce, then the procedures and policies that we can expect of an RFK Jr. would not be in favor of pulling people back in. It would be more in favor of more work from home to keep your workforce healthy. So take this into account, pay attention, be thoughtful about how you're dealing with guns in the workplace, because it's a growing cause of death in the country. And as small business people, we need to think about, okay, guns are allowed in many states. You can carry a gun. Are we going to allow our customers to carry guns into our workplace? Or are we going to allow our employees to carry guns in the workplace? I think this is something that we're going to have to address as business people and make a decision, make a policy, figure out what you're going to do. You can probably deal with any policy once you know what it is. But ignoring the situation, would only lead you to be caught off guard. And we've seen that if you look at the number of school problems we've had in the last 15 years, a lot of it was people just didn't pay enough attention. They got caught off guard. Whatever went wrong, there was a mistake made. People were not paying enough attention. Well, now it's time to start saying, okay, we're going to have to pay more attention ourselves to our personal health, to the health of our employees, to the health of our suppliers, to the health of our customers. because it's unlikely to be forced on us by regulation or regulators running around telling us what we have to do. They're not going to tell us how we're going to deal with this. We're going to have to figure out what we want to do on our own. So I think, again, we look at these appointments. We look at, Tulsi Gabbard coming in as the top spy, and she says, well, Russia didn't invade Ukraine. They were forced into it or pulled into it by U.S. actions. We start saying, okay, what does this mean? It means nation first, looking inwardly, but we're not going to be putting more into healthcare, immunizations, that sort of thing. We're not going to be spending more on law enforcement. So that puts more onus on the small to mid-sized business person to say, okay, how are you going to manage this? How are you going to deal with this in the next 2 to 3 years when we're dealing with a situation that's going to be different than the past, but yet will work its way towards the trend over the next decade?
Yeah, very well said. My final thoughts are that I tend to agree with most of what you said, and I just have I think that we'll figure it out. I mean, I don't necessarily think it's going to be gloom and doom. I think there's be a lot of pushback, a lot of lawsuits, I just don't think it's going to be a straight line to those things, but I still will plan for them. I will still have a contingency that says if this happens, then this is what we're going to do. But I think overall, it'll be in some ways, how they say 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, or other way around, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. I think we'll figure it out, and I'm pretty hopeful that the next 4 years, that we'll survive the next 4 years and see what happens after that.
And I hope the listeners walk away from this podcast thinking about the fact that we get very busy running our business. We lock in on what we've done, and we want to keep doing what we've always done. And now is one of those, and as a result of that, I go in, I say, hey, maybe we should talk about the future. Maybe we should do some scenario planning. And there's always sort of reluctance, like, do I really have to do that? Is there really something I have to do? Because I'm busy. I'm busy running my business. And what I would say is that this change of administration is going to be it's going to be significant. There's going to be a lot of things different in this new administration. Now is the time to do some scenario planning. It really is the time to do some scenario planning. It's very likely that if you don't think through the implications of what we're talking about on your business, you may stumble into a situation that puts you out of business. That could very easily happen when the world is a little more chaotic, when the rules are falling aside, when some of the resources you depended on aren't there anymore. When those things start happening, then around you is a different world. And if you don't have a scenario plan to know where you're going to go, you'll be standing there reacting. And if you react 2 or 3 times, we know that usually by then it's too late. Now you're reacting in a world you don't know what to do, and you don't have a plan, and you don't know how to move forward. So there's never been a more important time to do scenario planning. And in fact, it's almost like you just don't leave it up to luck. Because if you do, wow, luck is not a strategy.
Yes, very well said, Adam. Luck is not a strategy. And with that, we'll close out today's podcast. Adam, we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.